Hello, everybody. Once again, it is time to consider what is the celestial dance that this next week is bringing for our considerations. You know, each time I sit down to contemplate this, which, I can do from a quite a general level of investigation, which essentially is you look at the chart, you say, okay, this planet is in this sign and this planet is in this sign, and how are they communicating with one another? And that's fairly general, and one of the reasons that I chose the image that's behind me today is that we're in the season of Taurus. And if you look at this, let's see, get my fingers right. If we look at this level of drums all the way across here, we could say these are all different Tauruses. Yeah. And I can say this because one of the factors that I can't bring up easily in this weekly astrological consideration are the houses. And one of the epitomal and first steps in observing a chart is the houses. Because the houses, each house is an arena that stands for quite a variety of different options that are in play when that particular house is brought to the fore. And I can do this in an individual chart because what establishes the house pattern is the time you were born and the place on the planet where you're born. And that sets up a pattern that, here, like I'm looking at a chart here. Okay, this is a standard chart, Aries, all the way around to Pisces. And Taurus is right here, second house Taurus. But let's say that Taurus person is born at noon. If we do noon, this sun, Taurus, would be up here somewhere around this noon point, which is straight overhead. And that particular person's view on the Taurian dance is going to have a lot more to do with, depending on whether it's on this 9th house side or this 10th house side, as to, what from a 9th house perspective does this Taurus see as far-reaching options for, diving into, if you will, the merits of value that could potentially lead to a higher level of consciousness. Whereas if they're born just a little bit before noon-ish on a chart, or that's not exactly the case the way it would be, because time around the globe and how far north and south you are of the equator shifts that house pattern. They're born on the 10th house side, and so this Taurus, their value is tied in probably more specifically with, their career. What is the reason that they came to expand their Taurian awareness into that arena of, what level of career am I going to discover my value in, and just in the experience of my workaday environments, how am I going to be able to express or discover what is of value to me within that work environment? It could also be, it's a 10th house. So the 10th house is also, has a certain political bent or leaning to it, and as far as the Taurus there, instead of just, paying attention to the work environment or the career that I'm in, how meaningful might the dance with society be from the level of political or governmental perspective? So you can kind of see the houses, or if they're born here right around the time of the sun going down, which is over here on the right hand side of this chart. That particular Taurus, depending on which side of this line that sun happens to be sitting in, is, from the seventh house perspective, that Taurus is probably going to be a lot more tuned into, the whole experience of what does it mean to engage with others in, I'm going to use the term relationship, but I think it's important to see that this is relationship at all levels, partnerships. That might be a better term to consideration. That Taurus finds its value in engaging with other people at a partnership level. This house, it's likely that the work environment, the camaraderie that they establish with their co-workers are factors that are going to come into play. You can kind of see there is a kind of a partnership thing potential in either one of these houses, but so many other factors from a house perspective come into play that, this person with this Taurus sun in the sixth house may not have comfortable relationships or partnerships with the co-workers because they find themselves in a work environment that they don't feel at home in, and that will have a lot to do with what the conversation that is transpiring between the other planets in their chart. So when I come every week and I look at the chart and I kind of go, well, I can kind of see that, there's this celestial dance going on. These planets, they're in these particular signs, but it doesn't bring in the subtlety, the continuity of an extra flavor that those houses bring into the equation. So that only comes from sitting down to actually look at a chart individually with the person, because we are all individuals, like that row of drums that are behind me in this picture that I've chosen for today. But be that as it may, what's going on this week? This week is brought to you by Mercury, because Mercury, it does a couple of things this week. Right off the bat, here on Monday, the 12th, Mercury is in square aspect to Pluto up here, from Taurus to Aquarius. Mercury, what is it that we're thinking about? That's a mercurial thing. In a Taurian fashion, because it's in Taurus, thinking and communicating are a mercurial thing, and they're in Taurus. So what's of value, and also one of the things that comes into the equation with Taurus, not often talked about, is survival. Am I in tune enough with the natural environment, Taurus, to actually be in a position where I'm going to survive in some fashion? Am I going to have enough money? Am I going to have a house to live in? These are the kind of factors that really play into as value for a Taurus. Well, Pluto, which we've talked about before, up here in Aquarius, it brings a very different consideration and it's retrograde. The only planet that's retrograde right now is doing a revisit. That's when a planet goes retrograde, it's going back over areas that it has been to before in this early Aquarian thing, saying, while I'm doing this Aquarian consideration of, what is the best way for me to take an idea, the Aquarius thing, and you can kind of feel that mercurial overlay in there too, to take and facilitate this idea on a human level with those on my wavelength and, mull it around and, test each other to see what is of significance in this thing that could be of benefit to as many of us as possible. Now, this Pluto and this Mercury, they're in a square aspect to one another. Air sign, Aquarius, earth sign, Taurus. Generally, air and earth are not elements that easily or effectively see eye to eye on things. And thus, the square aspect excuse me, has this capability, if you will, to say, in this conversation, Pluto and Mercury wants, Mercury, you can kind of see the gadfly here, wants to flutter from flower to flower. This is a very spring thought, as we are in springtime right here. And Pluto is a lot more intense, a lot more interpersonal, a lot more focused, and so you get this square energy between these things. They're not exactly seeing eye to eye. Mercury may have an idea, floats it, it's a communication thing that's happening between these in this conversation, floats that idea into Pluto's realm. Pluto says, have you really looked deeply into the ramifications of what it is that your idea is going to expose? There's a Plutonic term. Exposure to factors that are often hidden beneath the surface. And Mercury, fastest, not the fastest. Moon is the fastest, but Mercury is the next fastest. Is on to the next thought, the next thought, the next thought. Just that fast. Pluto, farthest out planet in the solar system, is much more deep and penetrating, and perhaps patient would be a aspect of the Plutonic consideration that has to be considered in this equation of, too many mercurial ideas trying to be floated at once. And Pluto is saying, hey, what's the hurry? This life dance, this soul exploration that we, you and I, are on just may require stepping back a pace and allowing an energy to grow, matriculate, come into being with factors from the Plutonic perspective that initially you may not be aware of in your mercurial haste to, put out there. So this square between Mercury and Pluto, right off the bat on Monday this week, is saying, from an air perspective, the mind, the mental, the ability to, think and create stuff, which, inspires Mercury, because Mercury's about thinking, are not in such a rush to accomplish things. And if you really tune into a Taurian Mercury, that Mercury is really about, not being in such a rush, relaxing into a process. After all, Taurus is symbolized by the bull, and it's not the kind of bull thrashing around trying to create all kind of havoc and stuff. No, no, it's Ferdinand the bull out in the pasture, willing to smell the flowers, enjoy the essence of this natural world life that is being presented to it. And Pluto in Aquarius, yeah, it's in retrograde, is, actually diving deep into this potential earthly element, Taurus, in a way that doesn't necessarily spell comfort. And the reason why is because what is being exposed from the Plutonic perspective in Aquarius are versions or visions of what it is that we as a societal group have come together to accomplish. And from what perspective? Is it the perspective of what does the material world provide for us and how best can we utilize this? Yeah, that's one of the options. But you could also say that it's from a different perspective, a perspective of soul awareness. As a soul being, we came into this planet, each of us as a soul being, to facilitate or accomplish soul growth. And you kind of go, that's kind of like, it's not your everyday table conversation process that soul growth is considered. Always at work, though. And relevance, the relevance is more far-reaching than one life's incarnation has the capability of encompassing. On this very same day, the moon, our next player in this thing, up here in Scorpio, which is, by the way, has a very strong affinity to Pluto, is going to be full on Monday, relatively early in the day. So those of us on the American part of the thing, we're not going to see that exact full moon because the sun will be up. Well, I take that back. Well, yeah. I was going to say, because if I were looking at the houses, different reality, this sun would be above the horizon. Here's that house factor that I brought up to begin with. Anyway, sun here will be at 22 degrees across from, the moon across from the sun over here in Taurus. And we get this natural harmonic to consider. These two signs, Taurus and Scorpio, have to do with personal value, Taurus, and shared value, Scorpio. And somewhere in the middle, a level of connection between those two poles needs to be fathomed in an effective enough way that from an individual standpoint and from a collective standpoint, what is considered of value is going to be able to be brought forth in a way that something can resolve in the middle. The Sabian symbol for this particular new moon, full moon, I consider it because within the last few years, I believe the nodes were moving across this thing, and an eclipse occurred somewhere very close to the same degree. I think it was around 23 degrees of Scorpio. But it could have been 22, 21, somewhere in there. And when I was considering the Sabian symbols at that point, there was some potency in the air. After all, it's Scorpio. Scorpio is the land of, you know, culmination of a life cycle. But you could also see it as culmination of any cycle whereby something is being allowed to pass away so that something new can find enough space to be reborn that couldn't be reborn if the space wasn't made available. And that's all that death really is. It's allowing for your soul being to take a next step. So this Sabian symbol, I'm just going to read some stuff for you. A rabbit metamorphoses into a nature spirit. Sit with that and think on it. For myself, as a tuned in being to the shamanic process, nature spirits, they're everywhere. And you can have conversations with them. There's something quite magical in that space. The keynote: the raising of animal drives to a higher level. We're talking a full moon now, maximum reflected solar presence that is asking us to consider value from more than just a personal sense, but at the collective level. You know, and in that transposition of energy from a Scorpio side of the equation, are you tuned into the mysteries of what life is about? Can you? Do you? Are you aware that there are nature spirits alive around you all the time that you could tap into? But you have to learn how to listen differently. Now, the rabbit is a symbol of an overabundance of progeny, thus of a great stress on procreative and sexual processes. Nature spirits, on the other hand, represent the higher aspect of life energies, as they are said to guide those normally invisible forces controlling the growth of all living organisms, particularly in the vegetable kingdom. Thus, this symbol refers to the transmutation of the generative power into a more ethereal and subtle form of potency. Key word: transubstantiation. That's not something that generally we in our human endeavors on this planetary dance that we are about tune into on even an irregular basis. It is that life, death, rebirthing process, transmutation. What was is being transubstantiated. It is no longer requiring what was in order to discover what will be, because we've let go of a past version of ourselves so that a new one can put in an appearance. this is not a minor full moon to consider, and I'm going to just, let's just say that you happen to have your Scorpio in the 5th house. So this would be, the full moon would be in the 5th house of your chart. And in that case, you're going to, from a lunar perspective, what do I feel as very moon base about that creative version of myself, 5th house? And might I be, it's a full moon after all, in that sign of Scorpio in your 5th house, might I be more inclined to take a chance, gamble, if you were, on something that I might not generally be inclined to? But hey, it's a full moon in my 5th house, and it's in Scorpio. What kind of a gamble? What kind of a chance do I want to take to tickle, if you will, life's mysteries, that experience of standing on that edge between life and death? Use it cautiously if this is the case for you. Or let's say you've got your Scorpio over here in the 12th house. Now, from a house perspective, you've always had Scorpio in your 12th house. Therefore, there's a deep and a profound level of curiosity to really deeply try to comprehend, where does spirit fit into this life dance? And since, we're looking at the full moon, that maximum amount of reflected solar light, which is over here in the 6th house, saying, how is the experience right now, Taurus, over in the 6th house, that I am able to engage in an effective way with others on a meaningful course forward. And from the lunar perspective, full over here in Scorpio in your 12th house, how much light am I willing to allow to penetrate, Scorpio, into the depth of what it is that my spirit is asking me to accomplish in the investigation of what it means to be a soul being. So, just from that little smattering, that row of drums that's behind me in my initial image, each Taurus is going to, right now with the full moon in Scorpio, have this perspective that is unique to themselves, because it's Scorpio we're talking about for this full moon. 2 planets come into play, both Pluto up there in Aquarius and Mars down there in Leo, that are the 2 rulers of Scorpio, that are saying, well, if I were looking at this as a chart, I would say, well, I got Mars and Leo in the 5th house. There's a kind of a version of that Martian drive that, says, yeah, take a chance. I'm willing to gamble. And Leo, in what fashion? Well, it's got to be an expression about, the magnanimity of myself that wants to get out there and test the waters of beingness to see if I get any recompense, any response, if you will, from others to, paint the picture of the dynamism of who I really am. Anyway, that's just Monday this week. Also, if I just go to the next day, the 13th, we're going to look here at our declinations. The moon has gone out of bounds. It went out of bounds somewhere on Monday. And you see that red up there. And the moon will be out of bounds until, well, 13th through the 18th, essentially. So basically from Sagittarius through Aquarius. But right after the full moon, the very next day, you might ask yourselves, what did I set in motion at the time of this full moon that occurred on Monday, that as the moon goes out of bounds on Monday late going into Tuesday, what might be the ramifications from that Scorpio perspective that I may have too vigorously stirred the cauldron of life during that full moon things, and there are ramifications that are coming up because of it? Well, this out of bounds moon in Sagittarius is saying, what's the higher perspective that you might be able to glean from that process that you stirred up? They're from the experience of out of boundsness, the process of, is it going to be unrestrained, extreme, wild, independent? These are the kind of energies that an out of bounds moon represents. Actually, these are out of bounds planets, but the moon, you feel this energy. It's right there, and we just come out of this full moon going into this week and then going out of bounds. It could feel a little awkward. This would be a good time to ask your soul self, am I on the right path? Or, like the Sabian symbol, ask the rabbit. I think of, what's that? Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, the White Rabbit, and the Cheshire Cat. These are creatures that, those are both shamanic journey stories that, you can have conversations with them if you learn how to listen correctly. You have to listen with your heart and your soul. These things, could prove very useless in that kind of conversation. Pay attention to your dream experience. And I would particularly emphasize that if that full moon happens to be in the 12th house in that Scorpio zone, your dreams have got information for you. And you kind of see that if I wanted to do this for every house in the chart, I could be here talking for a long period of time, but save that for another day, an individual look at your chart and see what is it that tweaks you in a particular way that is just for you. You are one of those drums on that row. No matter what sign you're in, it could be any sign, but you have this matrix of planetary conversation going on that initiated your soul incarnation into this particular life, that is asking you to pay attention to what it is that you came as a soul being to bring for the rest of us as a consideration as we all grow at a soul level. The next mercurial thing that happens is on the 18th. Mercury comes into a square with Mars. On this very same day, Uranus is doing a conjunction dance as the Sun has just moved over it. Let's look at that Mercury square Mars to begin with. Mercury, our thoughts, our ability to communicate with our thoughts has the potential for a certain driven quality, Mars in Leo, to take chances. We were just talking about that a little bit ago. It would be wise to make sure that, because it's a square that's between these things, as to where the chances you are willing to take might lead. Well, that's the one thing you can't say about spontaneity in taking chances, is that you often don't know. And that Mars and Leo's, impulsive nature might have your words leaping off your tongue before you. So be prepared that as we get into this, this is the end of the week, Sunday, that as the week culminates, the moon is coming back into a bounds there in Aquarius, and the process and the experience of what it is that did transpire, perhaps abruptly, is asking you to, meditate upon it. Have that conversation with the white rabbit. Now, the Sun going over Uranus in Taurus there, that's a whole different ballgame. There's a dynamic quality of essential beingness, the Sun, that energy of life being in a close, tickling kind of conversational, energetic process with a being, Uranus, that has a level of unpredictability built in, saying, did you think of this? Did you think of that? In any moment, it could, fly off the handle and go this way or that way. There's a liveliness to what Uranus represents, and being in cahoots with the Sun in that close conversation. There's this is kind of a Cassini thing where Uranus has been given permission, if you will, to express itself. Keep your seatbelts fastened, because the potential of where that might lead, it would be foolish for me to try and tell you what that is. Just know that you could be thrown slightly off kilter, if you will, because of what transpires as the Sun goes over that Uranus in Taurus. Maybe it's Taurus after all. Your value structure has just been shaken. Did you lose a job? That could change your value structure. Did someone that you know all of a sudden come to you and provide a challenge to who you thought you were that, came from a deep place within them and touches your soul? That could affect your value structure. And I'm not talking just about the physical material value thing. I'm talking about a soul value. I will always talk about the soul value because it has far more relevance over a much longer period of time than you might realize. My house is lively. I hope you can't hear all the conversation going on in the background, but it's the dance of life. So, and on this day, Sunday, when the moon has come back in bounds, it's also holding hands with Pluto in Aquarius. Something, a part of you likely, but maybe just a part of the community group that you find yourself entwined with, might be seeking a new version of itself. But to get there, an in-depth Pluto consideration of why this kind of energy has surfaced for you all to consider. Okay. Now, let's see if we can get this. See this drum right here? We say this is one of those Taurians. Taurus, but it's in a, it has a strong water side emphasis in this particular person's chart. So that particular Taurus might be more emotional, may be more sensitive, if you will. And, Taurus is sensitive already. But with the water element emphasized in a Taurian experience, here's a process of, feeling the experience of what it means to engage with another. Up here we have birds, a Taurus with air element at work. This is a thinking Taurus. This is a Taurus that's tuned into the experience of communicating with others, but not just at a general level, but thinking, possibly lifting up on the wings of spirit and taking the bull by the horns and riding. Yeah, you can talk to the bull as well. Perhaps there are answers that the white rabbit didn't have for you that the bull might. But that's individual chart stuff that you yourself have to ferret out. I have an astrological capability of being able to point you in a direction for those considerations to wander into. You have to follow that path. I can't follow the path for you. I can only give you indications from what your chart particularly says is at work for you in this current moment. So that's all I got for this week. Enjoy, and keep in mind, Moon's going to be out of bounds this week. We begin with the full moon in Scorpio. And enjoy the ride. Ciao.